In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful. Welcome to Journey to Jannah, where timeless wisdom meets the present day. Here we bring you audiobook-style biographies of the greatest minds in Islamic history, scholars, thinkers, and reformers who shaped the course of knowledge, faith, and civilization. From Imam Abu Hanifa to Ibn Sina, from Al-Ghazali to Sayyid Qutb, each story is a journey through trials, triumphs, and unwavering dedication to the pursuit of truth. Sit back, reflect, and let your heart travel through centuries of Islamic heritage. One voice, one story, one lesson at a time. Subscribe now and begin your journey toward knowledge, inspiration, and Jannah, inshallah. Journey to Jannah, where knowledge lives. Al-Ghazali, the proof of Islam.
In the heart of the Islamic Golden Age, when knowledge blossomed across the vast Muslim world, a towering figure emerged whose thoughts and writings would reshape the spiritual and intellectual landscape for centuries to come. Abu Hamid Al-Ghazali, often hailed as Hujjat al-Islam, the proof of Islam, was more than just a scholar. He was a seeker of truth, a philosopher, a mystic, and a reformer. His journey was one of intense personal struggle and profound insight, navigating the complex intersections of faith, reason, and spirituality. At a time when skepticism and philosophical inquiry challenged traditional beliefs, Al-Ghazali embarked on a path to reconcile reason with revelation, logic with mysticism, and knowledge with devotion. This story traces the life of Al-Ghazali, from his early years in Tus to his rise as a celebrated scholar in Baghdad, his crisis of doubt and withdrawal from public life, and finally, his spiritual rebirth and enduring legacy. It is a tale not only of a man, but of a transformative moment in Islamic history, where faith and intellect met to inspire generations.
Early life and family background.
The city of Tus, nestled in the province of Khorasan, was a place alive with the rhythms of intellectual and spiritual pursuits. Here, on a cold day in 1058, a child was born to a humble family, destined to become one of the most influential figures in Common Era Islamic thought. His name was Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, though history would remember him simply as Hujjat al-Islam, the proof of Islam. Al-Ghazali's early years were shaped by tragedy. His father, a devout scholar and Sufi, had instilled in his son a love for knowledge and spirituality, but he died when Al-Ghazali was only a young child. Left an orphan, the boy faced a future that many believed would be marked by poverty and obscurity. Yet his mother's unyielding faith and her belief in his potential led her to ensure that he received an education that would prepare him for a life of scholarly distinction. She supported him as best she could, even if it meant making sacrifices. Al-Ghazali's path, it seemed, would be one of intellect and asceticism, but it was still unclear how far he would go or what personal struggles lay ahead. In his early education, Al-Ghazali gravitated toward the study of Islamic jurisprudence, theology, and logic. These were the bedrock of his education in Tus, but he also began to exhibit a rare capacity for understanding deeper theological concepts that set him apart from others. As a child, Al-Ghazali would not know the profound impact his early studies would have on his future, nor how they would be challenged by the harsh realities of doubt and disillusionment that would eventually threaten to undo everything he had learned.
Education and intellectual awakening.
As Al-Ghazali entered his teenage years, he left the familiar streets of Tus to seek further education. His journey took him to Nishapur, a city renowned for its scholarship and intellectual life. There, Al-Ghazali studied under some of the most prominent scholars of the time. It was here that he met the esteemed theologian and philosopher Al-Juwayn, who would play a pivotal role in his intellectual development. Al-Juwayn was a towering figure in the field of Islamic jurisprudence, known for his rigorous approach to theology. Under his tutelage, Al-Ghazali learned to navigate the complex world of Shafi'i jurisprudence and the intricacies of Islamic theology. However, Al-Ghazali was not content with the straightforward study of law and religious principles. He felt a deep yearning for something more, something that could offer him not only intellectual satisfaction, but spiritual clarity. It was in Nishapur that Al-Ghazali encountered the works of the great philosophers of the Islamic world. The writings of Ibn Sina, Avicenna, and al-Farabi, who had blended Aristotelian logic with Islamic thought, captivated him. Their rationalist approach to theology presented a world where reason and revelation could coexist, where human intellect could be trusted to uncover the mysteries of the divine. Yet, as he read their works, something inside Al-Ghazali began to stir, a quiet voice that questioned the extent to which human reason could truly understand the infinite. At this point, Al-Ghazali's mind was divided. The allure of philosophy pulled him in one direction, while his heart leaned toward the spiritual teachings of Islam. The young scholar was torn between the rational and the mystical, between the intellectual search for knowledge and the soul's deeper longing for divine connection.
The rise to prominence in Baghdad.
In 1091, Common Era, 484 Hijri, Al-Ghazali's life took a dramatic turn. He was invited to Baghdad to assume the prestigious position of head of the Nizamiyya Madrasa, one of the most influential institutions in the Seljuk Empire. The Nizamiyya was not just an academic center, but a place where scholars and students from all parts of the Muslim world came to engage with one another. It was here that Al-Ghazali would be thrust into the heart of the intellectual and political power of his time. Baghdad was a city brimming with intellectual energy, but it was also a place of immense political intrigue. The Seljuk vizier, Nizam al-Mulk, had built a network of schools that rivaled any institution in the Muslim world. To become the head of the Nizamiyya madrasa was a tremendous honor. It meant that Al-Ghazali had arrived. He was now one of the leading scholars in the Islamic world, a position that allowed him to shape the discourse of his time. In the early years of his tenure, Al-Ghazali produced significant works, gaining renown for his sharp intellect and ability to weave complex theological arguments with grace. Yet, as he became more entrenched in his studies, he began to feel a creeping dissatisfaction. Despite his outward success, a profound inner turmoil began to take root. Al-Ghazali had come to realize that while he had mastered the outward forms of knowledge, he still felt an emptiness within. The books he had read, the lectures he had given, and the debates he had won all seemed insufficient in providing the spiritual peace he sought. This realization became particularly clear to him as he engaged with the works of the philosophers. While they spoke eloquently about the nature of reality, God, and the cosmos, something in their reasoning seemed disconnected from the lived experience of faith. Al-Ghazali began to feel that the pursuit of knowledge, if done solely through reason, was a hollow endeavor. He saw that knowledge was not an abstract pursuit. It was a means to connect with the divine, to live a life of integrity and spiritual depth.
The spiritual crisis and transformation.
By 1095, Common Era, 488 Hijri, Al-Ghazali was at a crossroads. His intellect had led him to the pinnacle of academic success, but his soul was restless. The external signs of success, the lectures, the recognition, the fame, meant little in the face of the growing realization that his knowledge was incomplete. He felt that the path he had chosen was leading him into intellectual stagnation, a dead end where reason alone could not provide the answers to life's deepest questions. In the midst of this crisis, Al-Ghazali made a radical decision. He left his prestigious position at the Nizamiyya madrasa and embarked on a journey of self-discovery, seeking to find the answers to the existential questions that plagued him. This decision was not a retreat from intellectualism, but a response to the realization that knowledge without spiritual insight was empty. Al-Ghazali's departure from Baghdad marked the beginning of a new chapter in his life, one that would take him far from the academic halls and into the heart of Sufism. He traveled to Mecca, performed the pilgrimage, and continued his search for spiritual truth. Over the course of several years, he lived a life of asceticism, wandering from city to city, immersing himself in Sufi practices. The teachings of the Sufis resonated with him deeply. They spoke of direct experience with the divine, of knowledge that transcended reason and was rooted in the heart. Al-Ghazali came to believe that true knowledge was not something to be acquired through books or arguments, but through submission to God, through prayer, meditation, and purification of the soul.
The return to scholarship and the revival of Islamic thought.
After a period of profound reflection and spiritual growth, Al-Ghazali returned to Nishapur around 1106 Common Era, 499 Hijri, determined to share what he had learned. His experience of Sufism had given him a new perspective on the relationship between faith, reason, and knowledge. He sought to integrate his newfound spiritual insights with the intellectual tools he had honed over the years. His magnum opus, Ihya Ulum al-Din, the revival of the religious sciences, was the result of this synthesis, a work that would redefine Islamic scholarship for centuries to come. The Ihya was not just a theological treatise, it was a comprehensive guide to living a pious, virtuous life. It dealt with every aspect of the human experience, from ethics and theology to practical spirituality and Sufi practices. Through the Ihya, Al-Ghazali sought to show that the path to true knowledge and closeness to God was not a matter of abstract reasoning, but of living with sincerity, humility, and devotion.
The masterpiece, Ihya Ulum al-Din.
When Al-Ghazali returned to Nishapur in the early 1100s, he was not the same man who had left Baghdad years earlier. His time in spiritual retreat, his encounters with the Sufis, and his personal quest for a deeper connection with God had transformed him. It was this inner transformation that led to one of his most monumental contributions to Islamic thought, his magnum opus, Ihya Ulum al-Din, the revival of the religious sciences. The Ihya was not just another book of theology or philosophy, it was an attempt to bridge the gap between Islamic scholarship and the spiritual practices that had sustained Al-Ghazali during his years of introspection. The work, structured in 4 main sections, explored everything from the foundational principles of faith to the cultivation of inner virtue. It emphasized the importance of sincerity in worship, the purification of the soul, and the practical steps required to live a life that aligned with divine teachings. In writing the Ihya, Al-Ghazali aimed to revive the intellectual and spiritual vigor of Islam, which he believed had been stifled by an over-reliance on formalism and external practices. He sought to show that true Islamic knowledge was not just about memorizing texts or performing rituals mechanically, but about understanding the deeper meanings behind those practices. His work was a call to return to the essence of Islam, a return to the heart of the faith. Al-Ghazali divided the Ihya into 4 main parts. 1. Acts of worship. This section focused on the spiritual significance of prayer, fasting, charity, and pilgrimage, offering practical advice on how to perform these acts in a way that deepened one's connection to God. 2. Customary actions. Al-Ghazali examined the ordinary aspects of life, such as eating, sleeping, and social interactions, emphasizing how these mundane activities could be elevated to acts of worship if done with the right intention. 3. The destructive soul. This section dealt with the internal struggles that all humans face, the temptations of pride, greed, and envy. Al-Ghazali sought to provide spiritual remedies to purify the soul and cultivate virtues like humility, patience, and gratitude. 4. The constructive soul. The final section of the Ihya focused on the spiritual practices that lead to enlightenment and closeness to God. It explored the path of the mystic and the Sufi, encouraging readers to seek direct experience of the divine through prayer, contemplation, and inner purification.
A conflict of ideas, Tahafut al-Falasifa, the incoherence of the philosophers.
Though Ihya Ulum al-Din would come to define Al-Ghazali's legacy, it was another work, Tahafut al-Falasifa, the incoherence of the philosophers, that cemented his place as a towering figure in Islamic intellectual history. This work marked a decisive turning point in Al-Ghazali's relationship with philosophy. It was a powerful critique of the Greek-influenced Islamic philosophers, particularly Ibn Sina, Avicenna, whose rationalist approach had gained significant prominence in the Islamic world. In the Tahafut, Al-Ghazali accused the philosophers of overstepping their bounds by attempting to reconcile philosophy with theology. While he recognized the value of reason and logic, he believed that philosophy, when divorced from the divine guidance of revelation, was inherently flawed. The philosophical system that Ibn Sina and others had developed, according to Al-Ghazali, could not adequately account for essential aspects of the Islamic worldview, particularly regarding the nature of God, divine causality, and the afterlife. Al-Ghazali's criticisms were grounded in his belief that the philosophers had overemphasized the role of human reason in understanding the divine. He argued that reason alone was insufficient to grasp the mysteries of the cosmos and the nature of God. Philosophers like Ibn Sina had used their intellectual tools to describe a universe that operated according to strict natural laws, but this, Al-Ghazali believed, left no room for divine intervention, miracles, or the unseen aspects of existence. For him, this was a denial of the fundamental tenets of Islamic faith. The Tahafut was not merely an attack on philosophy, it was an assertion of the primacy of revelation and the limitations of human intellect. It marked Al-Ghazali's rejection of a purely rationalist view of the world and his reaffirmation of the importance of divine knowledge, which could only be accessed through faith, humility, and submission to God.
The legacy of Al-Ghazali.
Al-Ghazali's life was a tapestry woven from intellectual brilliance, spiritual depth, and profound personal transformation. His work touched every corner of Islamic thought, from theology and philosophy to ethics and mysticism. Through his writings, he synthesized the rationale with the mystical, bringing together the intellectual and the spiritual in a way that had never been done before. His influence extended far beyond his own lifetime. In the centuries that followed, his works became central to Islamic thought, particularly in the fields of theology, Sufism, and philosophy. The Ihya Ulum al-Din became a cornerstone of Islamic spiritual literature, studied and revered by generations of scholars and mystics. Similarly, Tahafut al-Falasifa set the stage for a deepened engagement with philosophy in the Islamic world, influencing later thinkers like Ibn Rushd, Averroes, and Mullah Sadra. Al-Ghazali's life is a story of intellectual courage, the courage to question, to seek truth, and to embrace spiritual transformation. He is remembered not just for the vastness of his knowledge, but for his ability to live according to the principles he espoused. His works continue to be a source of guidance and inspiration for Muslims and non-Muslims alike, offering a path that combines reason with faith, knowledge with wisdom, and the outward practices of religion with the inner depths of spirituality.
The end of a scholar's journey.
Al-Ghazali's intellectual journey was not just about rejecting or embracing specific schools of thought, but about finding a balance between seemingly opposing forces. He was uniquely positioned in his time, where the worlds of logic and reason, embodied by the philosophers, and the spiritual pursuits of the mystics, represented two powerful currents in the intellectual landscape of the Islamic world. His challenge was to reconcile these two forces. While he was deeply influenced by the works of the philosophers, particularly Ibn Sina and Al-Farabi, Al-Ghazali did not fully subscribe to their vision of a rational universe governed solely by the laws of nature. He recognized the value of logic and philosophy, but he also saw the limitations of human reason. Philosophy, in his view, could guide humans to a certain point, but there were realms of knowledge that transcended the intellect, realms that could only be accessed through divine revelation, spiritual practice, and mystical experience. His approach, therefore, was not to reject philosophy outright, but to critique it and place it within its proper limits. In his work Tahafut al-Falasifa, he used powerful arguments to show that reason alone could not explain everything. It could not answer the ultimate questions of existence, the nature of God, and the afterlife. Philosophy for Al-Ghazali was a tool, but not the ultimate path to truth. The real path lay in submission to God and the purification of the soul, a truth that could not be understood through reason alone. In his later writings, Al-Ghazali worked to bridge this gap. His approach was one of synthesis, incorporating philosophy into a broader framework that included theology, spirituality, and ethics. His work demonstrated that the intellectual and the spiritual were not mutually exclusive, but could complement each other. Knowledge, in Al-Ghazali's view, was a multifaceted entity, with each aspect contributing to a deeper understanding of the divine and the human condition.
Al-Ghazali's influence on Islamic mysticism, Sufism.
Perhaps one of Al-Ghazali's greatest contributions was his role in bringing Sufism, Islamic mysticism, into the mainstream of Islamic thought. While Sufism had existed in various forms before Al-Ghazali, it was often seen as a fringe movement, sometimes criticized by scholars who felt that its mystical practices deviated from the core tenets of Islam. Al-Ghazali, however, was able to articulate the value of Sufism in a way that made it accessible to mainstream Islamic thought. In his Ihya Ulum al-Din, Al-Ghazali brought together the teachings of the Sufis with mainstream Islamic practice. He acknowledged the importance of rational knowledge and jurisprudence, but he also argued that without the spiritual practices emphasized by the Sufis, one's knowledge would remain incomplete. He introduced the idea that spiritual purification and direct connection with the divine were not only valid but essential components of the Muslim way of life. Al-Ghazali's endorsement of Sufism was transformative. His works made Sufism an acceptable and respected part of Islamic scholarship. He showed that the mystics' pursuit of direct knowledge of God through prayer, meditation, and purification was not at odds with Islamic law and theology, but was in fact a vital part of it. His writings on Sufism emphasized the importance of self-discipline, inner transformation, and the cultivation of virtues like humility, sincerity, and devotion. This shift in perspective was instrumental in the development of Islamic mysticism. Al-Ghazali's influence ensured that Sufism would become a central part of Islamic thought, practiced by scholars and lay people alike. His work laid the foundation for later Sufi thinkers such as Ibn Arabi and helped shape the course of Islamic spirituality for centuries to come.
The philosophical and theological legacy.
While Al-Ghazali's spiritual insights and mystical teachings had a profound impact on Islamic practice, his philosophical and theological contributions were equally significant. His critique of philosophy in the Tahafut al-Falasifa provided a framework for subsequent Islamic thinkers to engage critically with the rationalist philosophy that had become dominant in the Muslim world. In particular, Al-Ghazali's critique of the philosopher's views on God's nature and the problem of causality had a lasting effect on Islamic theology. He argued that the philosopher's conception of a deterministic universe, where everything followed strict natural laws, left no room for divine intervention. For Al-Ghazali, the essence of Islamic belief was that God was sovereign and that the universe, while operating according to certain principles, was ultimately under God's will. Miracles, divine will, and the possibility of a personal relationship with God were central to his understanding of the world. This view would influence later Islamic theologians, such as Ibn Taymiyyah, who would further develop the ideas Al-Ghazali had introduced. His rejection of a purely mechanistic view of the universe and his insistence on the importance of God's will would echo throughout the theological discussions of later centuries.
Al-Ghazali's final years and death.
Al-Ghazali's later years were marked by continued scholarship and spiritual reflection. Despite his vast intellectual output, he remained deeply committed to the idea of personal transformation. His life was a testament to the possibility of integrating the intellectual and spiritual aspects of existence. Al-Ghazali continued to write, teach, and engage with students, but he also focused on his own spiritual growth, maintaining a life of simplicity and devotion. As he grew older, Al-Ghazali withdrew from public life to some extent, preferring a life of quiet reflection. He spent his final years in a state of peace, feeling that his work was complete. His death in 1111 Common Era, 505 Hijriya, came after a life dedicated to the pursuit of knowledge, virtue, and closeness to God. He was buried in the city of his birth, Tus, where his grave became a site of pilgrimage for generations to come. Al-Ghazali's death marked the end of an era, but his legacy continued to shape the intellectual, spiritual, and philosophical landscape of the Islamic world. His writings would be studied and revered for centuries, influencing scholars, mystics, and philosophers across the Muslim world and beyond.
The enduring influence of Al-Ghazali.
The legacy of Al-Ghazali lives on, not just in the pages of his books, but in the practices of millions of Muslims around the world. His ability to integrate reason and faith, philosophy, and mysticism set him apart as one of the most influential figures in Islamic history. His works continue to be read and studied, not only in the Muslim world, but also in Western academic circles, where scholars have recognized the profound depth of his thought. The Ihya Ulum al-Din remains a central text in Islamic spirituality, offering a path for those seeking to live a life of piety, virtue, and closeness to God. His critique of philosophy has influenced thinkers across cultures, and his writings on Sufism have shaped the spiritual practices of countless individuals. Al-Ghazali's life and work exemplify the power of the mind and the soul working in harmony to understand the divine. Through his tireless efforts, Al-Ghazali showed that true knowledge is not confined to the intellect alone, but must be combined with personal experience and spiritual practice. His life reminds us that knowledge is not an end in itself, but a means to a deeper connection with the divine, a connection that transcends reason and speaks to the heart. Al-Ghazali, the Proof of Islam, continues to inspire and guide those who seek a life of knowledge, virtue, and spiritual fulfillment.
Al-Ghazali's intellectual development and early influences.
Al-Ghazali's intellectual development was shaped by a variety of influences that spanned across different disciplines of Islamic thought, including theology, philosophy, jurisprudence, and Sufism. His early education, which began in the city of Tus, was grounded in traditional Islamic sciences, grammar, rhetoric, logic, and jurisprudence. However, it was during his time in the great centers of learning, in Nishapur and Baghdad, that he encountered the works of the philosophers and theologians who would influence his thinking. One of the most significant intellectual influences on Al-Ghazali was his teacher, Abu Hamid al-Haramain al-Juwayn, a leading scholar of Ash'ar theology. Under al-Juwayn's guidance, Al-Ghazali developed a deep understanding of Islamic theology and law, and he became well-versed in the complex debates of his time. But while al-Juwayn's teachings focused primarily on the rationalistic defense of Islamic beliefs, Al-Ghazali's encounters with the works of the philosophers led him to question whether intellectual reasoning alone could truly capture the essence of divine truth. It was this inner conflict between reason and faith that led Al-Ghazali to a transformative period in his life. While still deeply committed to his academic career, Al-Ghazali became increasingly disillusioned with the limitations of the philosophical and theological schools of his time. His experiences led him to adopt a more personal and spiritual approach to knowledge, culminating in his retreat from the academic world and his eventual focus on Sufism. Al-Ghazali's relationship with Sufism is particularly significant. While he was initially critical of the mystics, whom he saw as indulging in excessive emotionalism and neglecting the importance of rationality, his personal struggles with faith led him to explore Sufi practices more deeply. This exploration became a turning point in his intellectual journey, as he came to see Sufism not as a deviation from Islamic orthodoxy, but as a path to a deeper understanding of God and the soul. This intellectual evolution, from a scholar of reason to a mystic who embraced spiritual transformation, would become the defining feature of Al-Ghazali's life. His writings would serve as a bridge between the rationalism of the philosophers and the spiritual practices of the Sufis, creating a synthesis that has continued to influence Islamic thought for centuries.
Al-Ghazali and his contemporaries.
Al-Ghazali was not working in isolation. He lived during a period of intellectual ferment, when the Muslim world was grappling with the legacy of Greek philosophy, the rise of rationalism, and the flourishing of mysticism. Throughout his life, Al-Ghazali engaged with many of the leading scholars and philosophers of his time, creating a rich intellectual tapestry that would shape the course of Islamic thought. Perhaps the most famous of Al-Ghazali's contemporaries was Ibn Sina, Avicenna, whose influence on Islamic philosophy was profound. Ibn Sina's philosophical system, grounded in Aristotelian thought, sought to reconcile Greek philosophy with Islamic teachings. His ideas on the nature of the soul, the universe, and divine causality had a lasting impact on Islamic intellectual history. However, for Al-Ghazali, Ibn Sina's rationalism posed a problem. He believed that the philosopher's reliance on reason alone could not capture the full scope of the divine reality. In Tahafut al-Falasifa, Al-Ghazali directly critiqued Ibn Sina's arguments, particularly those concerning the existence of God and the nature of causality. Other contemporary scholars, such as Al-Raza and Al-Farabi, also had a significant impact on Al-Ghazali. Al-Raza, a prominent physician and philosopher, was known for his skepticism about religious doctrines, which contrasted with Al-Ghazali's emphasis on the importance of faith. Al-Farabi, who had earlier sought to reconcile Greek philosophy with Islamic teachings, was another scholar whose works influenced Al-Ghazali's understanding of philosophy. But Al-Ghazali's response to these thinkers was not one of outright rejection. Instead, he sought to engage with their ideas and show where their philosophies were incomplete from an Islamic perspective. Through his critiques, Al-Ghazali demonstrated the limitations of human reason and elevated Islamic theology, ultimately establishing a framework where both rational and mystical knowledge could coexist. His contributions to the intellectual debates of his time were not just reactive, but reflective of his broader vision for Islamic scholarship, a vision that emphasized the importance of inner transformation, spiritual growth, and intellectual humility.
Al-Ghazali's works and their reception.
The impact of Al-Ghazali's work was immediate and profound. Upon publication, the Ihya Ulum al-Din quickly gained widespread acclaim and became a standard text in the Islamic world. The Ihya's integration of spiritual, theological, and ethical teachings made it an invaluable resource for scholars and laypeople alike. It provided a comprehensive guide to living a life of faith, grounded in both intellectual understanding and personal piety. The work's emphasis on the purification of the soul resonated deeply with Muslims who were searching for a path to divine closeness. Similarly, Tahafut al-Falasifa had a lasting impact on Islamic philosophy. While Al-Ghazali's critique of the philosophers was controversial, it prompted a re-evaluation of the role of reason in understanding the divine. His attack on rationalism led to a more balanced approach to philosophy in the Islamic world, where reason was seen as a valuable tool but not the sole means of accessing truth. The Tahafut also sparked debates among later philosophers, most notably Ibn Rushd, Averroes, who sought to defend the philosophers and reconcile their ideas with Islamic teachings. Al-Ghazali's influence extended beyond the Islamic world, reaching the Christian and Jewish intellectual traditions. His works were studied by medieval scholars in Europe, and many of his ideas influenced figures such as Thomas Aquinas. In the Jewish intellectual tradition, his works were incorporated into the writings of philosophers like Maimonides, who sought to reconcile faith and reason.
Al-Ghazali and the Islamic Golden Age.
Al-Ghazali's work must be understood in the context of the Islamic Golden Age, a period of immense intellectual, cultural, and scientific flourishing that spanned from the 8th to the 13th centuries. This was a time when scholars in the Muslim world made groundbreaking contributions to fields such as mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and philosophy. Al-Ghazali's scholarship was part of this broader intellectual movement, and his works were crucial in shaping the direction of Islamic thought during this period. However, Al-Ghazali's greatest contribution may have been his ability to synthesize the diverse strands of Islamic thought and bring them together in a cohesive framework. By integrating the rationalism of the philosophers with the mysticism of the Sufis, Al-Ghazali created a model of Islamic scholarship that emphasized both intellectual rigor and spiritual depth. His work was a crucial part of the intellectual legacy of the Islamic Golden Age, and it helped ensure that the period's influence would continue to be felt long after its end.
The enduring legacy of Al-Ghazali.
Al-Ghazali's legacy is one of profound transformation. He was not just a scholar, he was a seeker of truth, a man who constantly grappled with the deeper questions of existence, faith, and knowledge. His life and work continue to inspire millions of people around the world, not only for their intellectual depth, but for their spiritual richness. Al-Ghazali's ability to weave together the intellectual and the mystical, the rational and the spiritual, ensures that his influence will endure for centuries to come. Through his writings, Al-Ghazali gave voice to the inner struggles of the human soul while providing a roadmap for intellectual and spiritual fulfillment. He showed that true knowledge and understanding can only be achieved when the heart and mind are united in their search for God. Al-Ghazali's teachings remain a beacon for those seeking to live a life of purpose, virtue, and closeness to the divine. Al-Ghazali's life reminds us that knowledge is not simply about accumulating facts or engaging in intellectual debates. It is about seeking a deeper understanding of the divine, about striving for personal transformation, and about cultivating a life of wisdom, humility, and piety. His legacy is not confined to the pages of his books, but continues to live on in the hearts and minds of those who seek to follow the path of knowledge and spiritual fulfillment.
Alhamdulillah for joining us on this journey through the life of one of Islam's great scholars. We hope this story inspired your heart and deepened your connection with the rich legacy of Islamic knowledge. If you found benefit in today's episode, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Journey to Jannah, your home for Islamic biographies, wisdom, and timeless guidance. New episodes are uploaded regularly, so turn on the notification bell to never miss a moment of insight. May Allah increase us all in beneficial knowledge and guide us on the path of the righteous. Until next time, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.